Chapter 9. The Fight. The Matsuda dojo occupied over half the compound. In centuries past, it had accommodated 50 students at a time. These days, the only people who trained here were the Matsudas themselves. Women weren't allowed on the floor, and Misaki made a concerted effort not to hover at the door too often. A lady was not supposed to take an interest in sword fighting. It wasn't supposed to make her eyes light and her blood surge. When she watched others in the heat of combat, she teetered close, much too close to her old self, and she found it best to avoid the edge altogether. But for once, it wasn't hunger that drove Misaki to follow her husband and son to the dojo doorway. It was pure motherly concern. There was a deadly edge to Takeru's Nayama that made her want to stay close to Mamoru. Just in case. Takeru had never been excessively violent with his children, never seriously injured Mamoru in training. But just in case. She knelt in the dojo doorway to watch as Takeru and Mamoru prepared to fight. Most practice matches done with wooden blades, but this wasn't a normal training exercise. The two had brought out their steel katana, placing them on the floor before them and bowing to the weapons in silence. It was a ritual that marked the beginning of a duel. Outsiders assumed that traditional steel didn't mean much to a master of the Whispering Blade. It was only after marrying into the family that Misaki herself realized how much the steel katana meant to the Matsudas. A Matsuda man's katana was his dearest companion up until and even after he achieved a Whispering Blade. It was only through rigorous daily training with that steel that he instinctively knew how to shape the blade and distribute the weight when it came time to form his sasayeba. A Matsuda who didn't train with an excellent metal sword stood no chance of making even a halfway decent one out of ice. Takeru, usually so calm and precise in his movements, tied his katana at his hip faster than normal, yanking the strings taut with uncharacteristic ferocity. His sword was Numu Kotetsu Katashi's proudest accomplishment, an elegant, minimalistic weapon, with a circular guard of unadorned steel and a handle of pearl white lacquer. The blacksmith had named the weapon Kyojetsu, the moon's spire, a blade so bright and clean that it could cut through the dark of night like Nami's mirror. Mamoru's katana, which he had helped to forge himself, was almost as long as Kyojetsu, making it a positively massive sword for such a young fighter. Nami and Nagi's serpent forms entwined in two-tone silver and bronze to form the guard above a handle bound in dark teal wrapping. The young sword didn't have a name yet. That was something it would have to earn in its Koro's hands, hands that faltered slightly as Mamoru slid the sheath into the belt of his hakama. Fingers fumbled with the string for a moment before managing to tie it properly. Takashi claimed that there were days that Mamoru could fight on almost even footing with his father. But Misaki could see when Mamoru took up his starting stance that this was not one of those days. He did a good job making his apprehension look like determination. It would have fooled the untrained observer, but his upper arms were too tense. His grip wasn't quite steady. They were the kind of cues Misaki used to look for when she needed to dismantle another fighter, which meant that Takeru could see them too. "If you think you're man enough to preach truth to me, you'd better be ready to back it up in combat," Takeru said, fixing his son with an icy glare. "Are you ready?" Mamoru nodded. "Yes, Tusama." "Good," Takeru said and shot forward. The first clash made Misaki's heart leap in something between terror and excitement. The ring of steel blades was like electricity in her veins. With a clang, Takeru knocked Mamoru's sword aside and sliced downward, bringing his sword to a stop a hair's breadth from Mamoru's neck. "Your defense is terrible," he spat, smacking Mamoru's cheek with the flat of his blade. "I hope you can do better than that." Takeru came at Mamoru again and again, each clash ending ruthlessly fast. Sloppy. He struck Mamoru's knuckles. Takeru had excellent control. Like any decent teacher, he would hit Mamoru with enough force to let him know he'd made a mistake, never enough to cause permanent damage or overwhelming pain. But today, he was hitting harder than normal, harder than he needed to. Still sloppy. "Your defense is pitiful." Takeru blasted through Mamoru's guard and struck him in the sternum with the hilt of his sword. Too hard. Mamoru doubled over. For a moment, Misaki thought his knees were going to give out, but he inexplicably managed to stay on his feet. "Stand up," Takeru said coldly. If I wanted to end this fight now, I'd have hit you with the sharp end. Stand and face me. Mamoru tried to straighten up, staggered, gagged, and clapped a hand over his mouth. Misaki was certain for a moment that he was going to throw up, but after a few deep breaths, he swallowed and lifted his gaze to meet Takaru's. Gripping his katana like a lifeline, he resumed his fighting stance. Takaru took the invitation without waiting for Mamoru to regain his bearings. Their blades crashed together so hard that Misaki felt the impact in her bones, her forearms twitching as she imagined the damage her own body would take under that force. The collision sent Mamoru's katana spinning out of his hands. On a normal day of training, they would stop after someone was disarmed. But Takaru kept going. Before the katana had hit the dojo floor, he was attacking again. Mamoru caught on just in time to form an ice shield across his arm. Takashi talked about how creative and skilled Mamoru was with quickly formed ice shields, but Misaki hadn't understood what he meant until she watched the boy summon ice to defend against the moon's spire. Takaru's blade glanced off the shield once, twice, and then stuck in the softer outer layer of ice. Misaki recognized the sophisticated disarming technique. She had never mastered it even at her prime, but Mamoru pulled it off neatly. His Jia swallowed the moon's spire and froze around it. Then, cranking his body around, he spun the sword from his father's hands. Takaru let it happen. His Jia was easily powerful enough to override his son's, but he loosened his grip and allowed Mamoru to fling the sword away. "All right, boy." Takaru flexed his fingers and the temperature plummeted. "If this is the way you'd rather fight." The whispering blade flashed out of nowhere. Mamoru ducked under the cut and rolled to retrieve his katana, only to meet a wall of ice. "I don't think so," Takaru said. "If you're man enough to stand and insult me to my face, then you're man enough to face me Jia to Jia." What came next was painful to watch. Mamoru had mastered every Jia attack in the kimono curriculum, and then some. He could shoot projectiles with pinpoint accuracy, sling whips of water at blinding speeds, and raise walls as thick as tree trunks. He was smart enough to use everything in his arsenal to keep Takaru and his whispering blade at a distance. None of it made a difference. Takaru cleaved through his defenses like they were rice paper, closing the distance between them within moments. In close, Mamoru had no choice but to try to match his father's ice katana with his own. In a seemingly perfect imitation of Takaru's technique, he opened his hand and let Jia pour out of his palm to form a sword of solid ice. It looked like a whispering blade, straight, sharp, and clear, but Takaru sliced through it in a single stroke. "Weak," he scoffed as Mamoru scrambled to reform the blade from where it had been severed. Muddy intentions produce an impure ice. Mamoru took a swing with his reformed sword. All Takaru had to do was raise his own whispering blade in defense, and Mamoru's ice broke against it. The process repeated again and again until Takaru lost patience and shattered Mamoru's entire sword, leaving him with a handful of splintered ice. Weaponless, Mamoru started to form a shield, but Takaru punched through it, knocking him to the tatami. Mamoru started, only to have the breath knocked out of him as Takaru's foot slammed into his chest, pinning him to the floor. "I yield," he managed to shout at last. "Do you?" Takaru growled and stabbed downward. Misaki screamed. For a single moment of blind terror, she saw Takaru plunge his blade into Mamoru's mouth, but that wasn't quite what happened. As Takaru's fist shot forward, his whispering blade collapsed into harmless liquid. It refroze across his knuckles just as they connected with Mamoru's face. The boy's head snapped back, blood blossomed from his mouth, and he lay there stunned. Takaru let out his breath. For a moment he looked like he was going to hit Mamoru again. Then he paused. "What are you doing, Misaki?" "What?" Misaki looked down and realized that she was on her feet. Not only that, she had taken 2 steps onto the dojo floor. Ice had formed on her fingernails in the beginning of claws. "Oh," she said blankly. "I am sorry, sorry." She quickly backed off the forbidden floor and folded to her knees, shaken. "I'm sorry, Takaru-sama." "Continue." Takaru stared at her for a long moment before turning his gaze back to Mamoru. The boy was still lying flat on his back, mouth and nose red with blood. His eyes had a blank, shell-shocked look about them, and Misaki wondered if he had thought the same thing she had for that split Dinma, that Takaru was actually going to kill him. A Matsuda does not yield, Takaru said. He fights through the enemies before him, or he dies in the effort. Takaru's fist was still clenched, the ice still cold on his knuckles. If you're too afraid to face the Empire's enemies, you have no right to call yourself part of this family. You have no right to stand before me in this dojo. Misaki barely heard the words coming out of Takaru's mouth. All her attention was on his fist as her mind screamed, "Don't hit him again. God's in the deep, don't you dare hit him again." She didn't think she would be able to hold herself still if she had to watch Mamoru take another blow. She was so intent on Takaru's icy knuckles and the red of Mamoru's blood that the sound of approaching footsteps made her jump. "Setsuko," she exclaimed as her sister-in-law came to stand in the doorway beside her. "Sorry." Setsuko bowed to Takaru. She paused as she took in the mess of ice strewn across the dojo and the blood on Mamoru's face. "I didn't mean to interrupt anything. What do you want?" Takaru snapped. "My husband wanted me to remind you that you have a meeting with him at the 11th Wadi at his office. Tell him I'll be late." "You're already late." Only Setsuko would dare take that tone with Matsuda Takaru while he stood, prickling with Jia, spattered with blood and ice crystals. He glared at her for a moment before turning to look down at Mamoru. "Clean up this mess," he said. "Practice on your own until I get back. You do not leave this dojo until you've fixed your sloppy technique." "Great Nami, what happened here?" Setsuko whispered to Misaki. "I'll explain later," Misaki said in a low voice. She and Setsuko got to their feet and parted to make way for Takaru as he stepped out of the dojo. "I'll go with you to Kimona," Setsuko said to Takaru. "My husband forgot his lunch, so I'm going to take it to him. I just have to get Ayumi bundled up for the cold. Go on ahead," Takaru said disinterestedly. "Pack up whatever you need. I'll be with you when you're ready to go." Setsuko took the hint to clear out and bowed herself out of his presence. When she had gone, Takaru turned his icy glare on Misaki. "Is this your doing?" he asked in a low voice. "Or just that city boy?" Misaki didn't know what to say. She may have been guilty of putting dangerous thoughts in Mamoru's head, and she didn't know how much influence Kwang Chulhi had on him. It was hard to say who was to blame for his doubts. But the gall to challenge his father wasn't something he could have picked up from either of them. Mamoru's rage was his alone. "I'm sorry." "I don't know, I don't care." Takaru turned away from her. "Just fix it." "What do you mean?" "If you had some hand in this weakness that's overtaken him, you said it right. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Misaki said timidly. She stood stiffly in the hall as Takaru walked away, taking the worst of the cold with him. In the dojo, Mamoru had gotten to his knees, but didn't seem to have found it in his legs to stand. Misaki itched to go to him, to pick him up, to heal the bruises. Instead, she just asked softly, "Are you all right?" "Yes." Mamoru stood gingerly, his mouth and nose dripping blood on his hakama. Putting his hands to his mouth, he glanced to the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said into his hands. "Sorry you had to see that." It wasn't clear if he was referring to his attitude, his sloppy fighting, or the blood. Misaki realized, with a bit of very misplaced amusement, that Mamoru probably thought this was the most violence she had ever witnessed. She finally came up with what she hoped was a reassuring, "I've seen worse." Mamoru stood alone in the middle of the dojo with his hands covering his mouth until he heard the sound of Takaru and Setsuko's footsteps leaving the compound and the thud of the sliding door closing behind them. Then he moved his hands, waking his Jia. Misaki watched in surprise as he drew the blood from his face and clothes then formed a scab over his split lip. She knew that as a child, he had shown promise in blood manipulation, but she hadn't realized that he still remembered the little she had taught him all those years ago. Not only that, he had clearly taken the time to get better at it. She had to wonder that all these years, this boy had been growing up right in front of her, and she had missed it. His lip mended, Mamoru walked around the dojo, melting down and evaporating all the ice left over from the fight. He didn't work with his usual speed and power, but Misaki was glad that he was at least walking and breathing normally. Once he had extracted the last bits of moisture from the tatami, to prevent any mold from forming, Mamoru picked up his katana and shifted into his starting stance. With a slow breath, he started running through his katas. Even without a real opponent in front of him, Mamoru moved with a ferocity that brought the sequence of movements to life. Misaki could feel each breath in her own lungs, each shift and explosion in her own muscles. She found herself matching his steps in her mind, striking and parrying the blade with her eyes. Slowly, she started to pick out the weak spots, the lagging movements, the openings. The form was beautiful. Not perfect. Not enough. Misaki didn't realize she had said the words aloud until Mamoru turned to look at her. What? It's nothing, Misaki meant to say. It's nothing. After all, what would a woman know of fighting? You won't fend off your father fighting like that. I know that, Ka-chan. Mamoru let his sword arm fall. It's obvious how much better he is. Misaki never would have guessed it from the boy's beautiful, fluid movements, but the irritable note in his voice betrayed the depths of his frustration. I don't know how to close the gap. I can't fight like he does. Yes, you can, Misaki said. You fight exactly like he does, just not quite as clean. That's your problem. You're trying to imitate a swordsman with many times your strength and nayama. You need to play to your advantages. What advantages? Your range of movement, for one. You're quicker and lighter on your feet than your father. Mamoru was shaking his head. That's nice of you to say, Ka-chan, but I'm not. If you knew anything about fighting, you'd have seen when we fought, I'm not fast enough to counter him. Yes, you are. Misaki stood. Your reaction time is noticeably shorter than his, but you waste movement when you hold all that tension in your shoulders. That's how he keeps getting through your guard. Mamoru stared at her, and she could see the wheels spinning in his head as he registered that what she said made sense, but couldn't figure out how she knew. If it's so obvious that I'm doing that, if even you can see it, then why didn't he tell me? He's been trying, Misaki sighed. That's what he means when he keeps saying sloppy. Oh. Mamoru looked down at nothing for a moment, thinking, visualizing. Then he made 2 cuts, in such quick succession that Misaki could barely follow the blade with her eyes. Better, she murmured. Not perfect. Better. Mamoru tried again, and Misaki found that she had taken a half step forward. Don't swing so hard, she said. If you have the angle right, the cut will go through without you throwing your whole body behind it. Yukino-sensei says it isn't easy to cut through bone and sinew, Mamoru said, his eyes still focused forward. It takes a lot of power. Power, Misaki said, not muscle. If you trust yourself and your blade, you'd be surprised how easy it is to cut through a human body. Her toes curled at the threshold. She tipped forward ever so slightly. Teetering. Ka-chan. Mamoru was starting to look worried. What on Duna are you talking about? I can't tell you. Misaki tilted, trying to will herself back from the edge. This is wrong. This is wrong, you stupid woman. Know your place, but I can show you. And she was over the edge, striding across the dojo floor, light with an idiot's elation. Mamoru's eyes were wide. Ka-chan, what are you doing? Something I probably shouldn't. She smiled as she reached the sword rack. But given your behavior today, you're not one to judge now, are you? She stood with her hands on her hips for a moment, surveying the rack of kotetsu swords in their refined lacquer sheaths. The swords at the top of the rack belonged to Matsuda patriarchs past. Having never seen the men's weapons so close, she took a moment to admire them. Beside Takeru's White Moon's spire sat Takashi's matched katana and wakizashi, Najimaru and Namamaru. Named for god and goddess, both weapons had leaping fish carved into their hilts and ocean blue wrapping knotted around their grips. Higher on the rack rested the ancestral sword Kurokuri, Black Ice, wielded by Matsuda Susumu and Great Matsuda's past. Above that sat Matsuda Mizudori's sword, the Mist Cutter, Kirinagi, his father's sword, the Cloud Whip, Kumokiai, and his father's sword, the Godfong, Senkaba. Just standing before the blades of legend put a tingle in Misaki's fingertips. She would never dream of putting her hands on such sacred weapons, but further down rested lesser weapons, katana, wakizashi, and tanto that were worn, damaged, or otherwise inferior, but still functional. From those, Misaki selected a slender wakizashi and tested its weight in her hands. "Ka-chan," Mamoru exclaimed, sheathing his own katana. "I don't think you should be touching those." Misaki ignored him. "Heavy." She frowned. "I suppose kotetsu weapons are always on the heavy side. No wonder your shoulders are so tense." "Ka-chan, those blades are all sharp," Mamoru said in mounting anxiety. "I don't want you to hurt yourself." "You're right." Placing the wakizashi back on the sword rack, Misaki crossed to the dojo supply closet and rummaged for a pair of bakken. "Put away your katana, son." Misaki knew she was violating sacred space. She knew she should leave the dojo now and pretend this had never happened, but her resolve only hardened as her hand found the hilt of a wooden sword. Takaru had told her to fix Mamoru. Well, she couldn't fix the fact that he was confused and angry. She couldn't fix the fact that he was 14. What she could fix was his technique. After some coaxing, Mamoru put away his metal sword and took the wooden one Misaki offered. "I don't understand this, Ka-chan. What is going on? You asked what I was up to at that foreign school all those years ago." Misaki gave the wooden sword a twirl, loosening up her joints. "Your father doesn't like it when I talk about it, but this won't require any talking." "Go on," she nodded to Mamoru. "Take a swing." He looked aghast. "You can't be serious." "Ka-chan, I'm not going to. Don't want to attack a little old lady." Misaki smiled. "Fine. Then defend." Chapter 10. The Reason. Misaki wasn't half as fast as she had been back in Karita, but Mamoru was so startled that he just barely raised his bakken in time to block. The hard thwack of wooden blades against one another woke an old joy in Misaki, and suddenly she was moving on pure, unfettered instinct, driving her opponent back. Mamoru was strong, but Misaki had made a name for herself fighting Theonites physically stronger than herself. If she met him muscle to muscle, the impact would devastate her joints. Instead, she let her blade ricochet off his and turned the energy back on him in her own strikes, a trick she had learned over years of fighting M.L.Wang era. Wood had a spring to it that metal didn't. The harder Mamoru hit, the more speed he gave her. She could see on Mamoru's face that his mind had gone numb with shock. His body moved on muscle memory, automatically matching each of her steps in perfect form, neatly countering each strike. But as quick as his reflexes were, that kind of conditioned movement had its limits. For one thing, it was predictable. Misaki feigned a thrust. The movement was ridiculously slow compared to her feints of 15 years ago, but Mamoru fell for it, which was all that mattered. As he brought his blade across to block, Misaki flipped her bakken over and struck him in the ribs. Mamoru uttered an undignified yelp, more out of surprise than pain. Misaki very much doubted that she could hurt him with a wooden sword. Stepping back, she clicked her tongue. "Now son, you shouldn't have fallen for that." Mamoru's eyes were wide, his hand on his side where she had hit him. "Ka-chan, this is what you did overseas, when you were at school. You fought." Mamoru shook his head, seemingly struggling to fit this new piece of information in with everything he knew. He brought a hand to his head, pushed it back through his bangs, and stared at his mother. I guess I shouldn't be surprised." "You shouldn't." "Well, Chulhi has been telling me about the places he's been: Yama, Sizui, and Kadasui. In all those countries, female Kuronu are allowed to fight and serve in the military." Misaki nodded. "That's how it is in most of the world." "Right," Mamoru said slowly, "and you went to school outside of Kaigen, which means that you went to school with those warrior women when you were getting to be fighting age. Aunt Setsuko is always saying you did really well there. So, I guess, it makes sense that you'd be able to fight just as well as anyone else." "I just can't believe I didn't know." "How did I not know?" "No one does," Misaki said. Honestly, she wasn't entirely sure that was true. It was common for one fighter to be able to spot another just by the way they moved, and Takaru and Takashi were two of the most perceptive fighters she had ever known. Sometimes, she found it difficult to believe that the brothers could have shared a roof with her all these years and not picked up on her combat background. Then again, it was very possible that the sexism inherent to their upbringing had created a blind spot so opaque that they weren't capable of recognizing those abilities in a woman. In any case, it was not something she would ever discuss with her husband or brother-in-law. You understand why your father doesn't know, why he can't know, Misaki said seriously. He would never approve. Takaru would reject her love of fighting like he rejected everything from her past. She waited for a painful moment for her son to reject it too. Everything in his upbringing suggested that women shouldn't fight, couldn't fight. They were precious dolls to be protected. Why wouldn't Tusama approve? Mamoru asked. I mean, I know it isn't normal for women to fight, but everyone always talks about how important it is for Matsudas to keep the bloodline strong by marrying women from powerful families. If you can fight, doesn't that just prove that Tusama married a powerful woman? So, you're not upset? Misaki asked, surprised at how fragile her voice had become. In that strange moment, she realized that, however improper it was, the idea of Mamoru's disapproval was far more upsetting to her than Takaru's. Knowing I can fight doesn't bother you? Why would it bother me? Mamoru said. This is good news. I'm the son of 2 great fighters instead of 1. This is good. It means that I must be strong. I should be proud. Misaki stared. It defied logic. How had a soulless block of ice like Takaru and a selfish thing like her created something so bright? Somehow, despite everything, despite this tiny village, his frigid father, his bitter mother, his brainwashing school, despite all of it, Mamoru was growing up into a good person. Ka-chan, Mamoru said uncertainly. What is it? Nothing. She shook herself. We have work to do. You're going to need to take a proper swing at me. Mamoru looked nervous. I don't want to hurt you. Misaki smiled. 18 years ago, if a boy had said that to her, she would have bared her teeth and said, try it. Now, she just smiled. They're just wooden blades, son. I trust you. She took up her stance and gave Mamoru an encouraging nod. I trust you. After a moment, Mamoru returned her smile and attacked. He didn't come at her full speed. If Misaki was being honest with herself, she probably couldn't handle him at his full speed. But if he was going to give her openings, she was going to make him sorry. Sidestepping a particularly hesitant stroke of Mamoru's bakken, she struck him across the knuckles. Ow! He stepped back, shaking out his hand. How are you so strong? I'm not. I'm bouncing off your misplaced force and redirecting it against you. I'm sneaky like that. You're amazing. Maybe for an old lady. Misaki rolled her shoulder and felt a few joints in her back pop. You should have seen me in my prime. I would have eviscerated you. You were that powerful? Mamoru said, and bless his heart, he didn't even look skeptical. No, Misaki said honestly, I was never as powerful as you, nor as talented. But I was decisive and willing to fight dirty. Of the 3 friends who had taken up crime fighting on Livingston streets, Misaki was the only one who had never had her picture on the news or trading cards. There was a good reason for that. Firebird and Whitewing were symbols meant to draw attention. They stepped onto a street intending to be seen, heard, and feared. Nobody thought to fear their creeping shadow until it was too late. Misaki was an ambush predator. Her preferred tactic was to take out a criminal's Achilles tendons before he noticed her crouched in the shadows. If he saw her before she could spring her trap, she still had the element of surprise, as few fighters ever expected a diminutive Kaigenese girl to have her unflinching ferocity. And if it came to a head-on clash, blade to blade, well, she still had plenty of surprises. In the next bout, Misaki used one of her favorite maneuvers. She took a swing and missed. Like everyone, Mamoru moved to take advantage of her moment of imbalance. But on the follow-through, she flipped the bakken into a reverse grip. While Mamoru was still starting his swing, she shot forward to meet him. His bakken thumped into her calf. In a real fight, she would have suffered an ugly leg injury, but her blade was at his throat. I win, she breathed as Mamoru uttered a short gasp. Why did you let me in? I fell for the feint. Only for a dinma. She had watched his eyes closely. You had a moment to correct, and with your speed, a moment is all you should need. Mamoru shook his head. It wasn't enough. You were too fast. No, Misaki said. 10 years ago, I might have been too fast. Right now, you're just slow. When Misaki attacked again, Mamoru blocked the strike to his neck, perhaps only because he was already expecting the feint. His counter was terrifyingly fast, but Misaki anticipated it and ducked. Mamoru's bakken whistled through the empty air above her head. As always, he swung too hard, needlessly throwing himself off balance. In the split second before he recovered, Misaki spun into his ankles, taking both his feet out from under him with a sweep of her bakken. Mamoru landed hard on his back, but it was Misaki who grunted in pain as they both straightened up. She hadn't put that kind of strain on her knees in years, and they were shrieking in protest. "Are you okay?" Mamoru asked. "I'm fine," Misaki said tersely. "You, on the other hand, are an idiot. Your father and I are both slower than you. Do you know why we can both get through your defenses?" Mamoru looked down at his arms. "I'm too tense." Misaki nodded. "And you swing too hard on your attacks. It creates an opening, during your follow-through in which you're vulnerable. I'm not sure what I'll show you. Come at me." Mamoru did as he was told, and Misaki realized, with a ringing pain in her forearms, that he was starting to fight her in earnest. She stayed on the defensive until inevitably, he swung too hard. "There," she exclaimed and darted forward. Mamoru, with his superhuman reflexes, managed a quick backstep. Misaki's bakken brushed the front of his kimono. Oh. Understanding lit his face as he looked down at his own chest. "You see," Misaki said. "I do," Mamoru exclaimed happily. "I see." Against someone with faster legs or longer reach, he would have been cut in half. "So, how do I fix it?" he asked, looking at her with eager eyes. "The first thing you need to do is relax your shoulders and stop gripping your sword so tight." "Right." Mamoru let out a breath. "I'll try." "Then you have to keep your body relaxed all the way through your cuts," Misaki continued. "You're trying to slice through your target, not smash it with a cudgel. You don't need to swing so hard." "But if I don't swing hard, how will I ever cut through anything?" "With confidence," Misaki said. "If your stroke is fast and decisive, you won't have to throw all your muscle behind it." If she had been fighting as hard as Mamoru, she would have completely worn herself out by now. A cut is the quintessential final decision, your life or your opponent's. If you don't have confidence in your choice, you won't commit to it. And if you don't commit, you will fail. Then, the tension returned to Mamoru's body, his hands clenched around the wooden sword handle. "I'm a failure." "What?" "I didn't say that. But I am. I'm a failure." Mamoru hit himself in the head with his bakken. "I have too much doubt in me. Tusama said my doubt is making me weak, and he's right. I can't." Mamoru. Misaki caught the bakken before he could hit himself in the head again. "I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "What?" He blinked at her, a red welt forming between his eyes. "You feel disillusioned with Kaigen." "I understand that. But just think for a moment, does that really change your reason for fighting?" I guess it doesn't." Mamoru frowned. "It just doesn't feel right, thinking that people have fought and died and will never know the truth about it. I don't know if I want to fight for an empire that disrespects its corona like that. There are warriors who aren't remembered for what they did well. Do you fight to be remembered?" Misaki asked. I didn't mean that. I'm asking honestly," Misaki said. "Do you fight for personal glory? So the name Matsuda Mamoru will go down in history? Or do you fight for the thrill? Or the privilege of serving your emperor? You need to ask yourself these questions. The only way to find that conviction you're missing is to know beyond a doubt what you're fighting for." "Well, where did you find your conviction, Ka-chan?" Mamoru asked. "Back in your school days, when you were at your best, what did you fight for?" Finally, a question that was easy to answer. "I fought to protect the people I cared about," Misaki said. "It was simple. My friends had grand ideals they represented. I just didn't want them hurt. Some people called me selfish, and they were right, but I was honest with myself, and it made me unstoppable. I never had any doubt about why I was fighting, and there was nothing I couldn't cut through." Ka-chan. Mamoru's voice had gotten quiet, like he was afraid to ask the question on his tongue. "Did you ever kill anyone?" "No." At daybreak, Misaki had taken a combination of combat and medic classes, then trained herself to cut with clinical precision. She would strike a criminal's weak points, rendering them unable to fight, and then clot the blood to prevent them from bleeding out before the authorities got there. She had taken tendons, eyes, and limbs, but never a life. I never had to kill anyone, but… Misaki paused to rub the skin between her thumb and forefinger where a blister was forming. But what? I would have… Misaki lifted her head to look her son in the face. If it came to it, I would have killed without a second thought. If it was to save Robin, I would have killed as many people as I need to. Who's Robin? Mamoru asked. He's… warmth. Hope. The sun burning through the fog. A robin is a Carithian bird. It's a metaphor. Oh. I know everything seems complicated now, Misaki said, but I suppose the only question that really matters is, if strangers came here intending to kill you, and me, and all your little brothers, what would you do? I would kill them, Mamoru said resolutely. I wouldn't have to think about it. I would kill them all. There. Misaki pointed to his chest. That's all you need. Really? Mamoru thought for a moment. It's that simple? It was for me. Then again, you may not want to take your old lady as an example. After all, Mamoru wasn't much like her. Now that Misaki thought about it, he was more like the people she would have killed and died for. You may well find that you have a higher ideal that you want to fight for. You're a nobler person than I am. Mamoru looked surprised. You're noble, Ka-chan. That is the dumbest thing you've said all day. Square up. Now that Mamoru had absorbed the fact that his mother could indeed fight, his Koro's brain had started to pick apart the way she fought. As he caught on to her tricks, she had to pull out more and more creative ways to counter him. It was a dance she had once danced with the most important people in her life, her teachers, her closest friends, her most dangerous enemies. But her body had changed since then. Her blade didn't cut as fast as her thoughts, and her joints screamed more insistently with each bout until finally, she couldn't bear it any longer. Realizing that her muscles would give in the next few Dinmanu, she parried Mamoru's overhand strike and went for one of her spinning attacks, just to see if she could still do it. She fumbled the stepping and came up short, but she could see on Mamoru's face that he was impressed. I've never seen anyone fight in that style, he said, not even Uncle Kazu. Those aren't Susanoo techniques. No, they're not. Misaki put her hands on her knees and tried to conceal how painfully winded she was. Her first teacher had been her father, who had trained her alongside her brothers for fun, not realizing he was planting the seeds of what would become a deeply rooted love for fighting in his daughter. But he was not her greatest influence. That distinction went to Master Wangera, the wild swordsman of Yama. Where did those techniques come from? Mamoru asked. Misaki shook her head and managed to gasp between heaving breaths. We don't talk about it. Are you all right? Yes. She nodded, kneading her right forearm, just at the end of my strength. Sorry, son. I think that's all I have in me. The muscles aren't there anymore. Have you not trained in all these years? Of course not, Misaki said. Housewives don't fight. I'm sorry, Mamoru said. I didn't realize that must have been hard for you. Don't be ridiculous, Misaki laughed. This is the most fun I've had in years. You're going to have to keep practicing on your own until your father gets home. If anyone asks, I was never here. You really love fighting, Mamoru said. It wasn't a question. How could you give it up? Misaki paused, still massaging her arm, trying to come up with an answer that would make sense to her son. Something I learned is that the act of fighting in and of itself isn't important. What was really important to me was protecting the people I cared about. I've never needed a sword to protect you, to raise you the way your father wanted. Caring for my family meant putting away the fighter, so I did. Mamoru was quiet for a moment, and Misaki looked up to find him staring at her with a confused expression on his face. What is it? She asked. Why do you call yourself selfish? Before Misaki could think of a way to answer, a whimper echoed down the hall and Mamoru turned to the sound. Izumo. That's for me to worry about. Eyes forward now. Misaki put the tip of her bakken to his jaw, turning his face forward. You just worry about what's ahead of you. Izumo's crying had woken Nagisa, but both boys had slept far longer than Misaki expected. Thank you, she murmured, ruffling Nagasa's hair before reaching into the cradle to pick up Izumo. "Thank you for giving me that time with Mamoru," was what she meant, but the two little boys were far too young to understand that kind of sentiment. "You're welcome, Ka-chan," Nagisa responded politely as Izumo kept crying. After feeding Izumo, Misaki tied the infant to her back, helped Nagisa into his coat, and swung by the elementary school to pick Hiroshi up from training. Having Nagisa along slowed her progress through the snow, but today, she was thankful for the little boy struggling along beside her. It gave her a periodic excuse to rest her own worn-out legs. "Oh," Nagisa exclaimed as he fell down in the deep snow for a third time. "Too slippery." Misaki took his arm and lifted him to his feet. "Snow on me," he observed and shook the snow from his sleeves, his jia sending it wide in twinkling clouds. The toddler had long since developed the ability to move water particles, but he lacked the control to move them where he wanted them to go. He still needed his mother to clear the path before him and to hold his hand where it was too icy. Mamoru and Hiroshi had both been more powerful and skilled than Nagisa at 3, but what Matsuda Takeru's third son lacked in jia, he made up for in chatter. "I fell down, Ka-chan," he explained as Misaki picked him up and brushed the snow from the front of his coat. 3 times. He held up 3 fingers. "I fell down 3 times. If it's again, then it will be 4 times. Now we're walking more. I can see our house." Misaki had learned that he didn't really need her to respond. He kept going all on his own. She had no idea where Nagisa had inherited his overgrown vocabulary and love of talking, but it could be convenient to have a child capable of entertaining himself with his own running monologue. "Hey, there are birds up there. Those birds can fly way up there. Maybe Izumo can see the birds. There's Ryota's house," he said, happily pointing at the Yukino compound. "See? Izuku-kun, see Ryota's house? Can we go see Ryota?" "We already saw Ryota-kun today," Misaki pointed out. "You played with him for a long time, while Hayari was visiting." "I like playing with Ryota," Nagisa said. "Ryota has toy cars at his house." "I know, but right now we have to pick Hiroshi up from training." "Okay," Nagisa said, and then promptly launched into another ramble about where all the birds might be going. When they reached the elementary school, Amino Samusa was waiting at the door to see his youngest student off. "How did he do?" Misaki asked. "He's getting stronger," Amino said. "It'll be quite a while before he's ready to be taking on serious opponents, but it's very unusual for someone his age to have such good control. I've been teaching here for 2 decades now, and I don't think I've ever seen his equal." "What about Mamoru?" Misaki asked, just out of curiosity. "Mamoru was exceptional," Amino said. "This one may be better." He shrugged. "Only time will tell." "Thank you, Amino-sensei," Misaki said, bowing. "Hiro-kun, get your shoes on. Time to go." "What does only time will tell mean?" Hiroshi asked as they made their way back to the Matsuda compound. "I think Amino-sensei means, we'll have to wait until you're big enough to fight your brother." "He thinks I could beat him." Hiroshi seemed vaguely fascinated by the idea. "In 10 years, maybe," Misaki said with a laugh. "Mamoru and I-san is strong," Hiroshi said. "He is bigger than I am." "He is," Misaki said. "But I could grow. I could beat him. Maybe. Like Tusama beat Uncle Takashi?" "Hiro-kun." Misaki stopped so quickly that Nagisa ran into her legs. "Who told you about that?" "The teachers talk about it sometimes," Hiroshi said. "Oh, well, just try not to mention it in front of your uncle, all right?" "Yes, Ka-chan." The results of the Matsuda brothers' last duel were common knowledge throughout the village, though most were polite enough not to discuss it. The fight had been years ago when Takeru had wanted to leave Kimona Academy to work in the mayor's office and Takashi had wanted him to stay. Their father, by that time very old and uninterested in their professional careers, had crossly demanded that they settle the matter in single combat instead of bothering him with it. Only a few people had witnessed the fight itself, Yukino Dai, who served as the referee, and a few other men, but people talked. One whispering blade was not necessarily equal to another. Takashi was a creative, devastatingly powerful swordsman with an explosive fighting style and 1,000 tricks up his sleeve. But when it came down to jia against jia, His ice was not a match Takaru's focus. But you know, Takashi and Ai-sama has had his share of victories against your father in the past, Misaki pointed out. That was the fate of all male Matsuda siblings, wasn't it? To beat each other into greatness like hammers on steel? They've always been close in compatibility, but you should keep in mind that they are close in age. It will be 10 years before you're big enough to challenge your older brother, and even then, he will be much more experienced than you. When Misaki looked down at Hiroshi, she was unnerved to find that her ever-serious second son had something like a smile on his face. I'm going to grow as fast as I can, he said.